This is Franklin Rye, and welcome back to Political Spirits. We still stand for the proposition that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. Compromise is not a requirement. If those discussions result in us changing or even abandoning our positions, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too. We just need to talk to each other. In that way, we can unify through speech. And if the discussion becomes a bit heated, at the end of the night, we should still be able to split up the bar tab and be on our way. So what are we going to talk about this week? Let's talk about a proposal that's being seriously considered in California, and that proposal is to tax texting. I'm not joking, really, to tax texting. Now, we've talked before about how the Beatles song Revolution is often characterized as a left-wing song advocating revolution, when in fact it's really quite a conservative song. Well, this latest proposal out of California reminds me of another Beatles tune, which just might be the most conservative pop rock song ever recorded. The Taxman. Check out these lyrics. Should 5% appear too small, be thankful I don't take it all, 'cause I'm the taxman. Yeah, I'm the taxman. If you drive a car, I'll tax the street. If you try to sit, I'll tax your seat. If you get too cold, I'll tax the heat. If you take a walk, I'll tax your feet. Don't ask me what I want it for if you don't want to pay some more, because I'm the taxman. Yeah, I'm the taxman, and you're working for no one but me. As I read those lyrics for the first time in quite a while, I think I should modify what I said before. I don't think it just might be the most conservative pop rock song ever recorded. I believe it definitely is the most conservative pop rock song ever recorded. And what puts it over the top for that honor is the final line, "And you're working for no one but me." What line better depicts the conservative complaints about the fruits of citizens' labor being taken by the state than the line that says the taxman is telling the citizens that they're working for the state and only the state? I wonder if all those stories about Pete Best, the original drummer, being the fifth Beatle, were wrong, and the fifth Beatle was really Ronald Reagan. You know, he actually could play a musical instrument. He played the harmonica. I could see using a harmonica on a few Beatles tunes. This latest proposed tax grab from California makes me think they should redo the Taxman as an ode to the People's Republic of California. So what would be the new lyrics? If you text your friends, you'll pay the state. If you post a tweet, you'll pay full freight. We know you want to email your suite, but pay the taxman or be on the street. You know what? Maybe I should leave the songwriting to the experts. Next topic. The latest evidence of left-wing authoritarianism. This one happens to come out of California as well. Now, we've all heard a lot of talk over the years, especially since President Trump took office, about right-wing authoritarianism. The standard claim is that President Trump, or before him, George W. Bush, is acting like a dictator and is driven by authoritarian impulses. But I've always felt, especially since the Democratic Party took a dramatic swing to the left under the Obama administration, that authoritarian impulses are more in line with the views of the left than the right in America, especially among politicians on the right who are actually committed to smaller government. So I wasn't surprised by what should be considered a disturbing statement by California Democrat Congressman Ted Lieu. He said this past week that he would, quote, love to be able to regulate the content of speech, close quote, including speech on Fox News, but he can't do it because of the Constitution. The full statement he made was in an interview with CNN host Brianna Keilar, and what he said was, quote, I would love to be able to regulate the content of speech. The First Amendment prevents me from doing so, and that's simply a function of the First Amendment. But I think over the long run, it's better the government does not regulate the content of speech, close quote. Now I appreciate that he said in the, quote, long run, close quote, it's better that the government doesn't regulate the content of speech. At least he's acknowledging that. But why the qualifier long run? The only way inserting that term makes sense is if he believes that in the short run it's better or may be better for the government to regulate the content of speech. That's terrifying. How do we have members of Congress in America who think that way? If you look at these instances of elected officials expressing these disturbing views, and you combine them with the views of millennials, which question the value of free speech, and with the ACLU's move away from protecting free speech, which we talked about in prior episodes, this is just another example of why I added to my critical issue considerations for the last presidential election concerns that we may lose our free speech rights, and I voted for Donald Trump to protect them, among other reasons. Next topic. What is brave and heroic? It seems to me that when it comes to labeling actions as brave or heroic, the media seems to have completely missed the cultural changes in our society over the last 50 years or so. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take the issue of public figures coming out as gay. Doing that in the 1960s would have been a career killer. Doing it in the 1970s would likely have been a career killer as well, with certain exceptions. Doing it in the 1980s would have probably resulted in the public figure being pulled into news stories about the AIDS epidemic, which could have disastrous consequences for a public figure's career. In those periods, a public figure deliberately revealing such personal info could rightly be labeled as taking a brave action. But by the 1990s, things were changing. After 2000, you can argue that a public figure coming out as gay could actually help his or her career. By the time 2010 rolled around, for many public figures, that wasn't even an argument. Such a revelation could actually be viewed as a potential career booster, even for athletes. After NBA player Jason Collins came out as gay in 2014, he was offered a short-term 10-day contract with the Nets. Such short contracts are intended for evaluation purposes. Teams can only offer 2 10-day deals during the course of the season, and then at the end of the 10-day period they have to make a decision about signing the player for the rest of the season. One interesting wrinkle is that the Nets issued a jersey displaying Collins' number 98 after they offered him the 10-day deal, and that jersey led the league in sales. First of all, players on 10-day contracts don't typically get their own jerseys marketed. But obviously, because of the history-making nature of the Collins contract in light of his coming out, this was different. But the fact that his jersey led the league in sales is the reason why I bring it up. For Jason Collins, who was in his 12th year at that time, and was certainly not a superstar, his revelation actually was a smart move from a business/publicity perspective. Am I saying I have a good understanding of everything that goes into making such a personal revelation on the national stage? Absolutely not. In fact, I have no idea what that would feel like. But what I am saying is that we as a society, at least to the extent what we say and think is being driven by the media, have failed to adjust our perspectives on this subject based on the cultural changes in society. To listen to the way the media talked about Jason Collins' revelations, you'd think that he made the disclosure in the 1960s or 70s. There is simply no way that it takes the same level of bravery to make such a revelation now as it did then. Here's an interesting question. In today's society, is it more brave to be an openly gay athlete or to be an openly and prominently observant Christian athlete like Tim Tebow? I think you can make a pretty good argument that in fact you are taking a greater risk of being publicly ostracized or criticized or ridiculed if you come out as openly and prominently observant as a Christian like Tim Tebow. Now, you could have management of teams concerned that you'll hog the spotlight and thereby cause dissension within the team, or within the team if you are receiving a great deal of coverage because you openly espouse your Christianity, like Tim Tebow, or because you have come out as gay. But the difference would be that the executives running the team and the ownership of the team can always count on the media to publicly celebrate them because of the team's selection or retention of an openly gay athlete. You simply can't count on that now as an openly and prominently observant Christian athlete. And that difference probably makes it a riskier move to be the Tim Tebow of the team as opposed to the Jason Collins of the team. Is that how it should be? Well, being able to come out as gay and not have it adversely affect your status as a member of the team is absolutely the way it should be. Likewise, being able to come out as an observant Christian should also be something that does not adversely affect your status as a member of the team. Is there anything else these days that used to be considered either a positive to divulge or at least not a negative? Well, what actually started me thinking about this issue wasn't the question of whether it was riskier to be an openly gay athlete or an openly observant Christian athlete. What started me thinking about this was a writer at the site Deadspin, Lauren Thiessen, calling Pat at Barstool Sports a, quote, traitorous queer, close quote, because he's conservative, and saying that conservative gays need to shut up. What these sorts of ridiculous exchanges usually prompt in me is the realization of how disturbing it is that some persons on the left believe that members of certain demographic groups have to think and behave in certain ways, or else they're considered traitors to their own race, gender, or sexual orientation. Think of all the times commentators on the left have basically argued that Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas or Dr. Ben Carson are not authentic African Americans because they're conservative. Now we have a commentator on the left arguing that members of the LGBT community who are conservative must remain silent. What kind of world is that? A world where if you're a black American, you must hold liberal views, or you really aren't black. And if you're gay, you must hold liberal views, or you must remain silent. How could that be viewed as anything other than racist because it's a belief that black people don't have the same freedom and ability to express beliefs across the entire political spectrum as is possessed by whites? How can that be viewed as anything other than homophobic because it is a belief that persons who are gay don't have the same right to publicly espouse beliefs which fall anywhere on the political spectrum? But this time, what these stories prompted in me is the question of whether coming out publicly as conservative is now a riskier choice than coming out publicly as gay. Could that possibly be true now? Think about the way conservatives are portrayed these days. We're referred to as fascists. There's a group that actually bills itself as anti-fascist, Antifa, which I would argue is itself fascist, which regularly engages in physical assaults on those who support conservatives or Republicans or President Trump. Look at what happened to the kid eating at the Whataburger in San Antonio, Texas, who had his Make America Great Again hat stolen and a Coke thrown in his face. Look at what happened to Sarah Sanders when she and her family were accosted while trying to eat in a restaurant, and Ted Cruz and his wife who experienced the same mistreatment. Look at the multitude of instances where Trump supporters were attacked, spit upon, pelted with eggs, tackled, and beaten, which are displayed on YouTube under the description, quote, Steve Bannon's new documentary film, Trump at War, that's Trump @war, launches free online access, close quote. The opening of that film is disturbing, but I couldn't turn away. It pulled together all of the various attacks on Trump supporters I've seen on cable television over the last couple of years, but I'd forgotten many of them. You should take a look as well. Look back at episode 3 of this podcast, entitled Self-Censoring Public, where I talk about a corporate executive who lost his job. He resigned under pressure because it was discovered that he contributed $1,000 6 years earlier to the ballot initiative to define marriage in California as solely between a man and a woman. That executive, Brandon Ike, lost his job because it was revealed he supported a religious social conservative cause. I think it's pretty clear now that at least in terms of pushback in the media and in the workforce, it's now a riskier proposition to come out as conservative than to come out as gay. Is that right? Absolutely not. Individuals should be free to come out as gay without backlash. Individuals should also be free to come out as conservative without backlash. Next topic. A current movie that Hollywood gets right. If you've been listening to episodes of this podcast, you know that I've been quite critical of Hollywood filmmaking. I've argued that Hollywood's leftward slant is so overwhelming that it prevents them from seeing opportunities for films which will sell well among conservatives in the South and parts of the Midwest. I've argued that it causes them to make films which turn off large swaths of the American public. And I've argued that movie reviewers are likewise influenced by their own leftward political slant, which causes them to overrate certain movies with a politically correct theme and to underrate movies which take a more right-wing perspective or politically incorrect theme. Therefore, when I went to the movies this past weekend with my son to see the movie Green Book, I was pleasantly surprised. Frankly, I loved the film. I can't think of a single negative thing to say about it. It's the story of a black musician, a piano virtuoso, on a concert tour through the South in 1962. He hires a brusque Italian New Yorker as his driver and a form of protection in light of the fact that he's a black man touring in the Deep South. As you would expect, there are numerous instances where racism is on display, including the grotesque policies forcing African Americans to use separate and far from equal lodging from white citizens. All of that is unfortunately and regrettably historically accurate. The filmmakers play it straight. What is displayed on the screen is what was happening in the South, and to a lesser extent elsewhere in the country. The film is well written. It is also well acted, particularly by Mahershala Ali as Dr. Don Shirley and Viggo Mortensen as Tony Lip. And it is engaging throughout. Perhaps the most shocking thing about the movie for me is that it's directed by Peter Farrelly of the Farrelly Brothers. That's right, the Farrelly Brothers, who directed Dumb and Dumber, The Three Stooges, and a host of other lowbrow comedies, including actually one of the funniest movies I've ever seen, There's Something About Mary. This movie is much more serious than anything else one of the Farrelly Brothers has ever directed. And frankly, it's a kind of movie that gets released only rarely these days. It's not a superhero movie. It's not an action flick. There's not a single explosion to be found in the entire film. It's not a remake of a prior movie done again with an all-female cast. It's not a classic television show re-envisioned as a film. It's just a very well-made historical drama that is amazingly historically accurate for a Hollywood film. It's the reason you should not give up on the movie theater. You might be thinking, what's the point of me talking about a movie when I have nothing negative to say about it? Especially given that I make it a practice in this podcast of being very critical of Hollywood. Well, you know what? I've said before that binge watching at home on a television, no matter how big the screen, is just not the same as going to the movies. One of the reasons is because when you're at the theater, you're forced not to start looking at your phone or your iPad and interrupting the experience of watching the film. I don't want to lose that. I don't want us to lose that option of going to the movies at the theater. And when I see an example of a movie that just flat out gets it right, I'm going to do my best to make sure the listeners of this podcast hear about it. I highly recommend the movie Green Book. Incidentally, the movie has an 83% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, well into the fresh category, and it's well deserved. So what rating would you give this podcast? Hopefully a high one. If so, I look forward to you being back to listen to the next episode next week. Until then, be sure to tell your friends about Political Spirits. and follow me on Twitter at Franklin Rye. Like me on Facebook at Political Spirits. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.